Good afternoon. I am delighted to be here. My name is Sarah Peticha. I'm the V3 curriculum developer. And today we're going to be talking on an important subject called culture clash, where we're really going to break it down between the differences between the military culture and that of the corporate culture and how that can create transition issues for the veteran. Today, I'm delighted to have my good friend, Saddiq Holliday, from Dominion Resources speaking. Like myself, Saddiq is also a veteran. Saddiq, I'd like you to just introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the curriculum.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Saddiq Holliday, 13 years Air Force, Air National Guard, and right now I am working as a military programs coordinator for Dominion Virginia Power in the HR department.
Very good. Thanks, Saddiq. Today, these are our learning objectives. We're going to define what an organizational culture is, so we can kind of define terms before we dig into this. And then we're going to really talk about the military culture and its characteristics. And then we're going to talk about a typical corporate culture and some of its characteristics. And then we're going to give real examples of culture clash, how it can be for a veteran in a corporate environment. We're going to then detail the change and transition process and what that would look like for different categories of veterans and how managers or those in HR can assist veterans in that transition process. And then we're going to end with some examples of how you can be a cultural translator. To begin, I think it's important to always define some terms. There's lots of descriptions that you can use for organizational culture. The one that I like is defined as a system of shared assumptions, values, and beliefs governing how people behave in organizations. Another way of saying this is it's the way we do things around here. What is interesting about culture is it dictates how its members will dress, act, and perform their jobs. And every organization has its own unique culture. What's interesting about cultures is that they are self-reinforcing. Typically, when we look at a culture, the leaders of the company or an organization will exemplify the behaviors that they want to see done by the rest of the organization. Those vying to become leaders in an organization will then model those behaviors. Therefore, the organization culture will reinforce itself, because if people want to stay in that culture, they must mimic and use those same behaviors. And so what ends up happening is cultural norms begin to occur in organizations where there are assumed ways of doing things. And when those things are not done a certain way, they appear to be wrong. A great way to illustrate this, I'd like to tell this story that I read about some time ago, and it has to do with a newly married couple. And the wife was cooking dinner, and the husband was watching what she was doing, and they were going to have a roast, and she cut off each end of the roast, put it in the pan, and then put it in the oven. And he asked her, why do you cut off each end of the roast? And she goes, I don't know. My mother always did it this way. So she called up her mother, and she said, why don't we cut off each end of the roast before we cook it? And she said, I don't know. Let me call my mother and find out. So they called the grandmother. And the grandmother said, well, we had a small pan. Now, that's kind of a little microcosm of what culture can feel like, because for the people in it, it seems very normal. This is how we've always done things. So as I begin to just talk about culture in the next few minutes, think about the culture of your organization. Think about the ways you do things that might appear on the surface as just normal, but from someone looking on the outside, it might be hard to understand, be different. So in talking about that, we're going to now move to talk about the military culture. And I'm going to have Saddiq share with you about the military culture. And I'm going to just begin by describing it a little bit, and then he's going to give some examples. So the thing to keep in mind with the military culture is that it all comes from what its mission is. If you go to the Department of Defense, you will find this mission statement: to provide the military forces needed to deter war and to protect the security of our country. Now, what that message really is in terms of a mission is that mission accomplishment then is placed over life itself. So the values of duty, honor, loyalty, commitment to comrades, to the unit in the nation is placed over life itself. And so to fulfill a mission where one could go to war and things can be chaotic, the military, therefore, is very regimented, and they try to have a lack of ambiguity so that when they're working in chaotic environments, there can be standard operating procedures, there can be established ways of doing things to take the chaos out of things that are very chaotic. In fact, the military uses boot camp as a way to integrate new recruits into the military way of doing things. When I attended the United States Military Academy, we referred to boot camp as BEAST. So it is a formal way of onboarding so that you are inculcated into that culture. And fundamentally, because lives are at stake, full compliance with procedures is required. Therefore, the military has a lot of absolute norms about professionalism and subordination. It demands that the members of its organizations be disciplined. And they have a highly centralized control mechanism, meaning that they have a hierarchy that's clearly understood by everyone. But what is unique to our military is that they often then decentralize execution because they have to operate on very large scales, moving entire units over to places like for Afghanistan or Iraq. They have to allow for decentralized control at the lower levels so people can execute and get their jobs done. There's also a belief in a merit-based reward system, and the military has specific rituals and symbols to convey important meanings and transitions. In this picture on the lower left side, you see this young woman is getting promoted. She's also, and you can see that people are standing at attention behind her. So this is an example of an awards and ceremony that's part of the military culture. Now, Saddiq, why don't you tell us a little bit about some examples of the military culture?
Right. I would agree with Sarah. Oftentimes in the military, we always are looking for that mission accomplishment. So as a unit or as a team, we're always looking for what the parameters of our mission are, and we strive to accomplish that mission. So we show full compliance with procedures that are required to make sure that mission is accomplished. And oftentimes when we're looking at our system of promotion, we're looking at the merit or the effort or the rewards that were put into that actual mission to define what accomplishments we need to get to our next position or to even get onto the next task or next mission.
All right, thanks. So some of the elements you would see in the military culture is high discipline, this professional culture. We have ceremony and etiquette. There is a great deal of cohesion because we depend on our brothers and sisters in arms for our safety. But it's also important to know that there are additional subcultures within the military. It depends what service branch you are. As Saddiq is Air Force, I'm Army. I have many friends that are Navy and Coast Guard and Marines. So they have different subcultures within those particular branches. And then it depends on the type of unit that you might be in. A fighter squadron, for example. Once you're in a particular branch of service, then you have a branch that you are, at least in the Army. You could be infantry, you could be armor, and so on and so forth. And they have their particular cultures. If you're in a warfighting community, a Navy SEAL, if you're in aviation or submarines, they all have a separate and distinct culture, but they have the common bond of being a part of the U.S. military. Anything you want to add?
I think that was spot on. When we get into the corporation or corporate America piece, there are a lot of factors that mirror the military in corporate America. So looking at your company as a whole and your company being broken down into so many subsets translates to the slide you're looking at right now.
Okay, very good. And that's a good segue. So what's different with a corporate culture? Well, corporate cultures exist to ensure the organization remains competitive and can create a profit. So it is often driven by the bottom line. However, if that culture is no longer working, it must evolve or it will die, because businesses are in the business of staying in business. So you may have been in a corporation that you saw them go through changes. I have been in corporations where we had to become much more process-oriented because we were losing all kinds of money. We had to have a focus on quality. So instead of being so customer-centric, we had to become much more process-oriented. And that's an example of a culture, a corporate culture, changing, and it was difficult to change. What we find in corporations is missions are typically defined by the leaders at the top. However, as you go further down, the mission may not be fully understood throughout all parts of the organization. I'm sure if I was to ask the people on the phone, what is the mission of their organization? Some of you could answer it, some of you could not. And I would say those that are closest to the top could probably answer it. Those further from the top might not be as so sure of what the mission of the organization is. So the organizational behaviors then become less clear the further you are down in the organization. And often this results in a lot of subcultures being created within departments or branches. I remember working for a large financial institution that had bought out a large mortgage company 15 years before I joined the company. And there was still the sense that there were bank people and there were mortgage people. And there was a kind of a divide within the company 15 years later. So subcultures can exist and then further diffuse what the mission of the organization is. What's interesting in corporate cultures, too, is that individuals may be encouraged to bring their values into a culture and change the culture. I have seen this in very diverse organizations that are trying to evolve. They tend to be very flat organizations, and individualism is really emphasized, so they try to evolve so that they can meet the needs of their community, that they're driven in certain areas. Maybe they want to capture the Latino culture with their products and services, and so they bring in a lot of the cultural influences of that particular culture into theirs. And I've seen that happen as well. So what you basically see in a corporate culture is they are more egalitarian, individualistic, adaptive, and less structured. And they focus on those measurable outcomes related to the bottom line, such as timeliness, budgets, efficiency, quality, and customer satisfaction. What I have found is that often in corporate cultures, they may or may not onboard new personnel explaining those cultural norms, those things that are kind of hidden from view but are considered normal. And so that can be a challenge for anyone joining that organization. You can also see in corporate cultures both decentralized control and execution, meaning decentralized control from the top and decentralized control at the bottom. And so you might get a varying directives getting to the bottom levels of the organization. And for that reason, sometimes junior leaders are very limited in their authority to make decisions because there's so many different things that are pulling at the very top of the house, so to speak. I've also seen that in corporate cultures, you emphasize personal expertise over individual accomplishment or even team accomplishment. So high-paying roles are often those with very specialized degrees, or certificates or technical skill sets. And so this expertise can be a bigger emphasis, and their competency measured through a performance-based reward system. So those are some of the things that you see in a corporate culture. You want to add anything, Saddiq?
Um,
Similar things?
Very similar things. You said that so well. I couldn't think of anything that I would add at this point. It was
Okay.
great.
All right. Okay. Now let's compare the kind of summarize where we are so far. So the U.S. military, a command and control kind of operational model, and then you have the corporate, which is more of a collaborative model. This chart kind of summarizes what we've talked about. You can have a very vertical and hierarchical structure in the military. Didn't matter what unit I was in. I could always kind of assess where I was because we had similar organizations. So there would be, when I was a lieutenant, I'd have a company commander. My company commander would have a battalion commander, and my battalion commander would have a regimental commander, or in my case, because I was combat service support, it was a DISCOM commander. So it was a very structured. It didn't matter where I was, in Europe or back in the States, they'd have similar structures. Now, when you get out into corporate America, often there's a matrix structure. I remember my husband's first job in a paper mill. He had two bosses. He had his boss that he was reporting to, but because he was a part of this large operation, he basically had to work for someone else most of the time. 90% of his time he was interfacing with someone else in the organization. It was very confusing. But the person that eventually, rates him was this guy that he saw maybe 10% of the time. So sometimes you'll be working on project teams, sometimes you're working on multiple project teams, and you rarely see your boss in corporations. Have you had that experience?
We do have that a lot. Oftentimes the rater is someone that you see only 10% of the time, and they get feedback from a supervisor or from a manager.
Exactly. I think one of the differences you also see is this heightened sense of urgency in the military, because you are always in the practice of being prepared and ready for war, and in many cases with folks now on active duty, they are in a war zone, or they're going to be soon activated to be in a war zone. And, quite frankly, things are less urgent. They're more profit-driven. It doesn't mean we don't have timelines and we don't have things we have to deliver in short time scales, often in corporations, but there is a sense of different urgency. Would you agree?
I agree. We find that the veterans, when looking at a project, will oftentimes finish that project, several days or even months ahead of the schedule, so they can move on to the next project, where a lot of the individuals that have been in corporate America for a long period of time almost finish the project on the deadline.
Yes.
So you have that different sense of urgency from a newly transitioning veteran and someone that's been in corporate America for quite some time.
Exactly. You also can have very large-scale operations. I've said this in my V3 training when I get the training day curriculum, but my first unit, I'm 21 years old, I have 80 soldiers. By the time I was 23, I had 320 soldiers. We had very large-scale operations because I was in combat service support with all the logistics behind supporting combat arms. So any pieces of equipment needed a lot of people to be able to repair them and get the repair parts and such. And so, again, back to that decentralized execution where you have a lot of authority. I think that's you often see in the military because everything is essentially done on a large scale. One of the things you see in corporations then is things are done on a little bit smaller scale, and a lot of times you may feel you have less authority. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that statement.
Okay. We do see, again, that emphasis on personal character because of the reliance on your brethren your brethren in arms for your life. So personal character, being able to trust people and honesty and things like that are very much emphasized. And so corporations, again, because of the mission, want to make sure that you are competent, that you can do the job that you've been shown to be able to do. So expertise is really recognized. And we've talked about this, the exact rules of conduct that are required in the military, yet they're more implied or understood rules of conduct. And again, define roles, rank, and status. In fact, the military uniform is a form of communication. I can look at somebody's uniform and know where I relate to that person in terms of my rank and my status. Do I need to salute them? Do I need to call them sir or ma'am? So there's all these things that are about the military that makes it very clear. However, that may not be very clear in the corporate environment. We were just at a V3 training day yesterday in Virginia Beach, and a gentleman came up, and he works for a very large insurance company, and he had gotten out of the military. He was a career military person, and he started working there, was excited to be there, and then he got called into the president's office because he was calling him Mr. whatever, and he said, we only go by first names here. And he said that was one of the biggest things that he learned, that he could call anybody by their first name. So, you know, you can read the rest of this list. Consistency across units, you see variations in terms of teams and divisions. Sometimes in corporate America you have very large organizations. Then sometimes you have very specialized groups. So you can see just a variety of different variations. And again, if it's matrixed, you're often working with members from several different departments, maybe on a project. I think the military has these common beliefs and bonds and traditions that sometimes are missing from a corporate environment. They have imposed values, things that are brought down from the top that you have to kind of assimilate and kind of make your own. And I think another thing to mention is that communications in the military, because of its mission, tend to be direct, concise, even curt at times. And I think it's really kind of encouraged in corporations to be a bit more open-ended, conversant, and consensus building. Would you agree?
I would agree. I've had several meetings with individuals where we got to know each other before we got into the meat and potatoes of what the meeting was going to be about. And that was very different coming from my military structure, where the meeting had an agenda. We laid out our plans, then we talked about how we would execute it. So in corporate America, oftentimes they want to know who you are before they want to know what you can do.
All right. Now, we wanted to talk about culture clash in real time. Lisa Rosser is the founder of The Value of a Veteran, and these are a series of trainings that she's developed. They're usually 15 minutes or so. If you're a V3 certified company, there's possibility of getting access to her work. She does some great, great work, and I just thought this was a great summary slide of, if you're not familiar with the military culture, you might be misinterpreting what veterans are like. Saddiq, did you want to talk about any of these in particular?
I would say being the curt and concise or direct veteran during your first weeks or first year on the job oftentimes takes a person that's used to the corporate culture off guard. A lot of companies or individuals within the company would think that you were overconfident, where we train in the military to be extremely confident in what we do. You're definitely not going to allow a pilot to get in an airplane that you're not confident is going to fly. So this heightened sense of confidence and being more direct, because we're working in a time urgency or time compliant environment, oftentimes doesn't translate well to corporate America. So taking a little bit of time to get to know your coworkers and maybe explaining about what you do in the military will help them understand why initially you're going to be so direct or so concise, especially after, with myself, if you've had those drill weekends or you're coming back from a deployment.
Excellent. I think I've also seen some veterans stepping in and taking ownership of a situation and then being interpreted, you know, you're kind of overstepping, might be a little cocky, you might be, you know, we don't let, you know, just new people do those kinds of things. I've seen that occur. Have you?
Oh, absolutely. That actually happens all the time, especially with my company, 1 in every 5 hires being a veteran. That's common. So we're getting used to that part of the culture where the veterans will come in and have the expertise to oftentimes do jobs outside of their initial role that they were hired for. But it does take a while for certain individuals in your organization to get used to that personality.
All right, let's give some examples. As you can see in this picture, this gentleman, we're going to say, was a retired military officer, and he was hired by a company, to be a consultant because of his expertise. But he noticed that this Xerox machine was broken, and no one was able to fix it. So because it had to be done, he spends his time fixing that Xerox machine rather than doing his $150 an hour job. Because the culture would be, it just has to get fixed. We've got to get it done. No one else can do it. It'll inhibit the flow of the work. So this might be an example where the veteran simply needs to be reminded we are a profit-driven organization, and that's where you need to be spending your time. We have people that will fix Xerox machines. All right. Another example I like to give is the benefits question. Say that a newly hired veteran goes to lunch with his colleague, and the colleague's been in the company for some time, and they're sitting there eating lunch, and the veteran says, what's this? It's September, and he says, what's this about benefits sign up? I mean, what is that? The colleague goes, well, everybody knows. We do it every September. And the veteran who's accustomed to having all his benefits, paid for and selected for him in the military is thinks, why is this place so disorganized? On the other hand, the other person can't understand why somebody wouldn't know that. So they both could go away from that conversation with misconceptions of one another that aren't completely accurate. The veteran thinking this place is disorganized, and the individual thinking, gosh, doesn't he know anything? So again, these are just some examples of what could be a culture clash. Do you have an example that you want to share?
We have a large internship population, which means we have a lot of individuals that are coming from college with their degree programs and interning in various parts of our companies. With the large amount of veterans that we have working, that professional development for younger enlisted personnel sometimes kicks in. So instead of the newly hired veteran actually doing their job, they're taking a leadership role to try and develop some of the interns outside of the regular program. So oftentimes, I'll say we as individuals have to be reeled back in to say, hey, there's a department that works with development of, say junior enlisted or interns in the company. We need you to do your day job, and we'll take care of the interns. So that's just an example of sometimes how your military training kicks in when you're supposed to be doing the actual job you're hired for.
Great example. Example I like to talk about is I'd been out of the military for some time. I was working for a large bank, and I was heading up an initiative and had to work with the director of communications on getting this initiative out to all the managers in the company. And so we're having this meeting. I was fairly new to the company, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and I had heard that they had something called an all-hands meeting. Now, in my military mind, that was formalized when I was pretty young. All hands means mandatory, everybody has to be there. And so I said, okay, so we'll kick this off. We have the CEO come in to this all-hands meeting, this mandatory meeting, and tell the managers that this is the new initiative that they're going to, and what their part is in it. And so she looked at me, sat back in her chair, and she looked at me, her head kind of turned, and she goes, Sarah, I've been here 17 years. We've never done anything mandatory. And I came away thinking, what kind of place is this? She probably thought I was probably a bit rigid because I used the word mandatory. So what would have been helpful is if she had said, Sarah, we understand that's the concept behind all hands, but when a manager has a demanding customer that needs his attention, they don't have to come to the all hands meeting. When something that's business centric takes them away, it's not required that they be there. Then I would have understood. But I had to do that cultural translation all on my own. So these, again, are just to get you thinking about the different cultural clashes that could occur for veterans and how they might be misinterpreted. We've also come up with a couple examples. I'll let you read these. I'm not going to read them, but I thought they were very telling of how, this officer and these enlisted service members from various branches experienced their culture clash. Saddiq, when you read these, is there any one that particularly resonates with you?
The third one resonates with me.
The urgency and the decision making. Yes, I can agree with that as well. But again, this is to make you aware that these things occur and may go unnoticed unless you're attuned to them, and that's what we hope we're providing for you through this training. Now what we thought we would do is to really talk about the change and transition process that occurs and how you as leaders, as HR professionals, and potentially hiring managers of veterans can assist as someone goes through this change and transition process. First thing I like to say is to think of these models as helpful, because when you can articulate what is going on, it actually diminishes the negativity of going through something like that. So models are helpful, and they can be helpful to managers and leaders as they explain things going on to people. So I hope you'll use this as you need with your own subordinates and as you go through change in your own life, because change is the constant in all our lives. So the first thing is to understand in this change model that there is a distinction between change and transition. Change is the discrete event that has occurred, but transition is the emotional and psychological changes that you have to go through for the change really to take effect. I think we've all probably run across people that stay stuck, and so that's typically because they're still working through those emotional and psychological changes. So what I'm going to do is explain the change curve from the perspective of this type of veteran, because veterans come in all kinds of brands and all kinds of vulnerabilities, as I've stated over here. You know, you could have someone that has finished their active duty and now they are jumping into corporate America. You could have somebody that, because of the downsizing that's occurred in the military, they can no longer stay in the military. And so this is a change that is affecting them. In other words, they had no control over this change. And so you could have somebody who's retiring from the military, you could have a disabled veteran, or you could have somebody like a National Guard or reservist that has gone on active duty and now is coming back. So for the purpose of explaining the change curve, I'm just going to talk about the veteran that has completed their active duty time and has decided to enter corporate America. So initially, this is a change that they feel in control of. And so initially, they may come into your organization and be very, very happy. They're figuring something out. They're in a new time of their life. But then they begin to realize that the culture is significantly different than what they experienced in the military. They may be in an organization where they thought they were hired for a particular role, and that role is a little different, is in fact quite a bit different than what they expected. And so now they're realizing, oh my gosh, what have I done? Now they go typically into denial. This can't be happening. This is not what I expected. They may begin to get angry because they realize that what they had before seems so much better now. And so they kind of get angry. And so what could be also happening is they can miss what they had in the military. They may miss their friends. They may miss the camaraderie. They knew somebody. They may have had to move to take this job, and they're in a foreign, another part of the country that they haven't been in before. And so they're angry because it's unsettling. Maybe they're in a matrix organization and they don't understand who they report to, and they feel like they're making mistakes on the job. And so they kind of go to a low point. Now, at that point, they're still looking in the past. Now, the exploring portion is when they try new things to manage this new change in their life. So they made a good friend within their department that they start telling them about things that they can get connected to in their local community. They tell them a little bit of the inside track of the company and how things really are. They learn some of the norms. They begin to feel a little more success in their job. Maybe they're getting feedback that they've done well. And then they move into acceptance. They now are on the upside of the change. They've accepted that this is their new norm. They're going to be able to survive here, and they have made it through the change. Now, I want to take you through that with a leader that would be involved, in a sense, with that person who's made that change, that transitioning service member, first job that they get out. Initially, they should recognize that this is going to occur for this individual. They're going to go through the change curve. So initially, they need to give them information. They need to supply them, while they're in the denial phase, all the information they need to know what's going on in the company, how they're going to be evaluated, being very clear on expectations, letting them know how to get connected from everything from benefits to other veterans that might be in their organization. That kind of moves into stage 2 to get them through that lull and that anger and that feeling lost a bit, is to give them that support, connect them with a mentor potentially, connect them with maybe if they don't know how to do an expense report, giving them access to the learning management system where they can be taught that, or maybe they've never done benefits, actually walking them through that process. So that's all the support that they get. Then when they start exploring how they can grow in this new place, then they would give them direction. This is where you can find out, these are 6 people that you need to get to know in the company, for example. A good manager would do this, that will help you understand how our part of the organization fits in the rest. You need to know these people. We work very closely with them. I've set up a meeting with this individual so you will understand how our 2 departments work together to get it accomplished, to accomplish what we need to accomplish, so on and so forth. So you're giving them lots of direction. You're also giving them feedback. When you were in that meeting, you didn't say much, you didn't become involved, or you overstepped your role. This is giving direction because you're staying in constant contact with them. You're also leaving it open-ended so that they can ask you questions to get direction so they can get closer to meeting your expectations. And that comes with the encouragement, telling them when they're doing things well. And that will help this individual go through the change curve more quickly and efficiently. Now, I thought I'd turn it over and have Saddiq talk about his change curve, because he's been a National Guardsman for some time. And so why don't you talk to them about how you manage your change and transition?
Okay, so I'll use an example of working on a project. So after finishing a TDY where I had a large leadership responsibility, I came back to work to work on a team project. In that project, I was put in a support role. In my mind, I was still in a leadership role, especially since I understood every aspect about how to do this project. So I went from being a leader back to corporate America with the mindset of, I can't believe this. Being in denial, I wasn't given a leadership opportunity with this project. I was working on a support role. From that feeling, I went down to frustration, not really anger, but others would feel anger, knowing that I could accomplish this project really by myself. I really didn't need a team, or I could lead the team that could get this done in record time. And then I had to come back to exploring my feelings and looking at what I was doing as now being part of a group and not part of my military unit anymore, and understanding and accepting the role I was in. And once I got to that part of the curve where I was going on the upswing in my emotion, I was able to, throttle back, take the role as a contributor to the team and really help excel in the project. So that was how my curve went. And there's not only myself, but many others who go through the same transition when they come back to their civilian job after most likely having some leadership role or having some major responsibility from a deployment or a TDY.
Exactly. Excellent example. And of course, there's disabled veterans that might also be dealing with both visible and invisible injuries, and so they have their own change curve to go through in addition to any change curve to adapt to a new working environment. All right, how to be a cultural translator. I thought I'd let you talk about this slide in terms of some things that you have seen work, and there's some ideas here on the slide, but things that you've seen really assist people as they, you know, bridge that gap between the veteran and the culture that they find themselves in.
Okay, so for the company I work for, we almost have a two-sided approach. So we look at the approach from the transitioning veteran side, but then we also look at it from the employer benefit education side. So for example, we give post-traumatic stress disorder training for our human resources department, our managers, so they in turn can teach their managers and supervisors how to notice the signs or what help or assistance there is through the Department of Veteran Services. We also do military training to help our leadership as well as employees understand what values the veterans bring into the company, and also how you can help those veterans transition. We also use our employee resource groups. We have a Dominion Veterans Network, and we have onboarding champions that help new veterans that come into our company assimilate to the culture. And being an energy company, there's a lot of terminologies, policies, and procedures that we can help the veteran assimilate to when they transition in, pairing them up with the veteran throughout anywhere in our footprint. So that could be in Virginia, that could be in Ohio, that could be in our nuclear station in Connecticut. So we use our employee resource groups to help reach our transitioning veterans to actually speed up the transition so they can assimilate and get the happy acceptance part of that curve a lot earlier. We also work with the ESGR, Employer Support Guard and Reserve, to make sure that the managers, supervisors, and HR directors and support groups understand what benefits the veteran has if they get called up to a deployment or if they need to do their guard duty, to make sure they completely understand and support the sacrifice that that veteran is making for the company and also for our country.
Didn't you guys win a special award from
we just won the ESGR award for 2016 for employer supporting Guard and Reserve. So
and that's pretty telling, because that's saying the employees who are National Guard and Reservists have said Dominion does all these things.
That is correct.
Well done, well done. All right. Here's some manager's tips. One, we know from research that managers have the greatest impact on the overall happiness and longevity of a employee. So managers, beware. So you should be the one that works closest with the employee to anticipate those cultural transitions, to know about them, to look for them, to look for the outward signs so you know where they are on that transition curve, for example, and keep communication lines open to your transitioning service members, whether they be National Guard and Reservists or a brand new transitioning service member. Allow them to ask questions about things that are confusing or unclear, especially for those that are newly exiting the military. You need to explain the context and nuances of your culture to them. If they ask questions, it's an indication that they may not understand. We also know that if you set clear expectations and tell them what success will look like and how it will be measured, you'll have more success in getting them onboarded more quickly. And clearly, if you provide that ongoing coaching and feedback, you're more likely to get them to understand where they need to correct, where they may be overstepping, where they need to rein it in a little bit, as we've heard today. Those are why you must have ongoing coaching and feedback planned with your newly transitioned service members. All right. Well, we've talked for quite a bit. We wanted to see if there is any questions that we could answer. I'm going to see if we have any questions currently. There are no questions. I'll give you a few minutes and see if there's anyone that, I guess we did a great job, Saddiq, because there's no questions right now. If you want to type anything in, we'd be glad to answer. So we're going to give you a few minutes to do that. If anybody else. Okay, I'm seeing that there's no questions at all. But we have enjoyed spending this time with you. Again, that you can reach out to Saddiq or myself at these emails or phone numbers if you have questions that you want to follow up with us. And now we're going to turn it back over to Sequoia with the last details of this webinar.
All right. Thanks again, everybody, for attending today's webinar. We do have a brief survey that I'm reminding you about again that's going to pop up once you close out of this webinar. 7 questions. It just takes a few minutes, and we really appreciate your feedback to let us know what we did well, what we didn't do well. It helps shape not only this particular webinar, but any other webinars we might do in the future. So thank you, and have a good rest of your day.